Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In this video, I'm going to explain about my research in tourism and economic growth in Malaysia. Evidence from tourist arrivals from ASEAN countries. My research is divided into a few chapters, which is first is introduction, second literature review, third methodology, fourth expected finding, and lastly conclusion of the research. Chapter 1, Introduction. On the research background, state that the GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. This method is used to calculate the economy yearly balance panel data and relationship between 6 international tourism receipts and real economic growth in Malaysia. There are few steps in order to complete the GDP calculations, such that we're going to use panel unit root test, panel co-integration test, and panel granular causality test. This use of GDP is very important, such that because it is commonly one of the most widely used indicators of economic performance. Next, problem statement. Based on the research, the tourist economy exists for a variety of factor of reasons. As a result, GDP is used rather than other methods in estimating a balanced panel data set that includes Malaysian GDP growth and international tourism receipts from 5 ASEAN countries, such as Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, Brunei, and Philippines. The objective of the study is that to calculate and estimating a balanced panel data set that includes Malaysian GDP growth and international tourism receipts from the 5 ASEAN countries. Secondly, to calculate relationship between international tourism receipts and real economic growth in Malaysia. Scope of the study. The scope of study was focused and calculate using 3 methods mentioned previously, which is panel unit root test, panel co-integration test, and the panel granularity causality test to determine the result. And the data was collected from Tourism Malaysia 2005, Table 1. For the outline of the study, we basically known that this research consists of 5 chapters. The first chapter, Introductions, which is an overview of the research. The second chapter, such that literature review, and the third chapter was methodology, and the fourth chapter was what is the expected finding, such that the result that we should get from the research, and lastly conclusion, such that we're going to discuss and conclude of our research. Chapter 2, Literature Review. Based on the study of Cantavella, Jorda, and Balaguer 2005, use this method, such that Anger and Granger two-stage approach and the bivariate vector autoregression VAR model to investigate the causal relationship between tourism development and economic growth in the Korea economy. The study produced 2 key findings, such that the co-integration result and the result of the granular causality test. But this method is referring such that it is not accurate, such that there are no panel time series approach used. Next, multivariate causality analysis. This method is used to examine how the arrival of tourists affects Greece economic growth according to Sakis 2004. But this method is also inaccurate because there are no time panel used. Lastly, panel data analysis. This panel data and analysis is to investigate the relationship between the tourism and economic growth in 4 Pacific Island countries, which is the Fiji Island, the Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, and Tonga. Still, this research is not accurate, such that there are no panel time series approach used. By referring to these 3 methods or research, it is stated that the use of panel time series approach is really important to obtain an accurate result. Chapter 3, Methodology. GDP growth in Malaysia receives from 5 ASEAN countries. Based on the methodology, this study makes use of a balanced panel data set that includes Malaysian GDP growth and international tourism receipts from 5 ASEAN countries. For this research, we have conducted 3 different tests to obtain the objective of our studies. Firstly, we're going to use panel unit root test. This test is very important before we're going to proceed with the panel co-integration test because it is to emphasize the panel unit root properties of all series used. This is the formula for conducting panel unit root test. Next test is panel co-integration test. After we finish with panel unit root test, this panel co-integration test can be performed. Pedroni proposed several co-integration tests that allow for heterogeneous intercepts and trend coefficient across cross-sections, including panel V statistic test, panel P statistics, panel PPT statistic which is non-parametric, panel T statistic parametric, group P statistic group, and group PPT statistic. And all of these tests is pulled together and can be estimated by using the formula given. Lastly, panel Granger causality test. This test is a continuation of the previous test in order to develop a model with a dynamic error correction representation based on the assumption of the real GDP and 15 international tourism receipts are co-integrated. And this is the formula to calculate and to obtain by using Granger causality test. Chapter 4. Expected finding. Expected finding for panel unit root test. By using that panel unit root test, the result should be the null hypothesis of non-stationary cannot be rejected in the panel unit root test since we include a panel times series approach. The associative probability should then be all greater, but the series in first difference should be excluded so that the result of the panel unit root test are smaller for all series. This shown that even with a small probability, the null hypothesis of non-stationary will be rejected. Secondly, the expected finding for panel co-integration test. After performing the panel unit root test, the result of the panel co-integration test such that the finding indicated that there should be an existence of a long-run trend or a relationship between international tourism receipts and real economic growth. Lastly, the expected finding for panel Granger causality test. The panel Granger causality test result should show whether there is a strong, weak or no relationship between international tourism receipts and real economic growth. Chapter 5. Conclusion. For the discussion and conclusion of the study, the purpose of the study is to find the causal relationship between international tourism and economic growth in Malaysia using a panel data time series approach for the period 1998 to 2005. The result should be found using Pedroni's panel co-integration test and panel Granger causality test. By referring to these two tests, state that there is a short and a long run relationship between tourism and Malaysian economic growth. Using the study, the government should highlight and prioritize this sector because it contributes to our country's economy, and government should invest more in this sector in order to attract more tourists to our country by improving the infrastructure in all Malaysian holiday destinations. Lastly, limitation and future work. There are few limitations in the study. One of that is that the criteria must be set in order to obtain results that are not inconclusive. Aside from that, the study only study in a limited regions. because more data and criteria would be required if a broader range of regions were used. As a result, it is suggested that for future work, another method that is easier but produce better results should be used. Next, use more diverse data to develop the deeper into the study and comprehend more factors influencing tourist influx to our country.